We're talking about neurodiversity. So what do we mean? Are we all neurodiverse, Brian?
I think so. What's neurotypical? What's typical anything? Every business you talk to is different. Every person you talk to is different. Every environment you come into is different. So what's typical as a word in itself? But neurotypical is for me, broadly offensive, because wouldn't you hate to just be like everyone else, and take personalities out of it? And I think society trying to label people neurotypical, neurodiverse, ADHD, autistic, lesbian, gay, whatever, is just a symptom of a society that feels it needs labels for whatever reasons so they can compartmentalize people into boxes. And I think, we seem to be losing our creativity. We seem to be losing our identity. We seem to be losing our tribes because they're kind of harder to find because you've been boxed into one that you maybe don't fit into, but you've been given a label. So therefore you're in that box. And you're like, I want to be in that box over there because that's creativity or whatever. And I think there's a real risk that by labeling people neurodiverse or neurotypical limits the contribution that we can receive from them, or that those that are neurotypical can give to everyone else as well, because you're not neurotypical because there's no such thing.
No, that's got to be right, hasn't it, Joanna? I think 100%. Of that neurotypical. You particularly when you're thinking about kids. There's different levels of creativity. There's different levels of confidence. There's different levels of anxiety. And I tend to agree with Brian that if we just try and say, well, that 6-year-old is like that because they are this, and that's just how it is. There's no cure. It's a condition. It's a disorder. And they're like this forever. And that's bad. It just seems to me that maybe that's not the best way of dealing with it.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. I think I don't agree with the terms neurotypical and neurodiverse. I think the only thing in the diversity part of neurodiversity is that it is massively complex and everybody is unique and different. I think trying to pigeonhole people into a box that says X, Y, or Z is really, really dangerous. And, everybody is unique in their own special way. I had a meeting with the Senko of seniors this morning, and her first question to us was, tell us about Joseph and his strengths. And I thought that was a really positive way of looking at things because, again, it's not about the box or the definition. And the only time, I guess, sort of labeling can be useful is unfortunately to get through the struggle of getting help and getting assistance with certain measures that you need or support. But it shouldn't be that way. Again, it's way too restrictive, and the stigma still that exists around it is just so totally unnecessary, but it's there.
It is there. And, it's probably an interesting point that we think about, well, what potential positives are there in someone who has certain characteristics? Because there always is, isn't there? From my perspective, just starting perhaps with the education system, I know this issue of the fight you face. The first thing we've got to acknowledge here, schools are providing education at scale. They have an awful lot of pressure upon them, which in itself, I think is, if anything, it's increased in recent years through the advent of social media, through the different challenges that kids of all shapes, sizes, and indeed diversity present. But it seems to me that certain schools, I'm not sure there's a pattern just in terms of the conversation I have between, say, the private and the public sector. I don't think it's as straightforward as that. But it seems to me that some schools within that provision of education at scale don't have the sort of sophistication in the way they teach or just the way they treat kids to be able to say, well, we're not going to be able to just adopt a one-size-fits-all approach to the curriculum. Was that something you encountered, Brian?
Yes. So I have a real challenge with the system. We've spoken before in our conversations around this, which is, we work in a education system that was built for the industrial age, which was built to create people in rows, all wearing the same uniform, all having to queue up in the yard before they go in to sit at the desk, to be quiet, to listen, to not have an opinion, because it was built for a manufacturing environment on the back of wartime. And I think it just beats the creativity out of children, because they don't want it. They want you to be a foot soldier. They want you to be someone who's going to, listen, action, deliver, listen, action, deliver, go home. I can understand why it was built, but it's not fit for purpose for today. And there doesn't seem to be any desire to revisit or relook or take a risk on it. You look at Finland, where children are children until they're 9. So they go into the educational environment, and it's about learning through play and through discovery and through creativity. And then they start curriculum by the time when they hit 9. But by then they've actually learned times tables, how to spell, how to read, etc., but through a different methodology, which is play and discovery. So they're no further behind by the time they hit 9, but they've done it in a significantly different way, which creates a much more creative mind. I was kind of reflecting, before we came in, on some of the experiences that we had in school. And I was thinking back to during COVID times, the fun times we had online with schools. And I remember listening in on one of my young lad, the youngest is 9, and the teacher, and she's a terrible teacher, was saying, another word for bigger. Luke, give me another word for bigger. Luke is this other kid in the school. And he went, oh, gigantic. She went, no, you're wrong. I was thinking massive. And I was like, I'm pretty sure he's, when you're kind of going, shit, I want to hit unmute, but you're kind of too late. And you're thinking, oh my God, there's someone who's kind of like given the right answer, but she's like, no, this is what you must say, because this is what I want you to say. And I just kind of thought, that's such a simple reflection of, creativity being beaten out, or thinking slightly differently being beaten out. And it's just that just permeates its way through. And any child that doesn't necessarily fit that, or any child that doesn't fit that industrial age box, which is like from another era, is thought to be different, or have a disorder, or be neurodiverse. They're not neurodiverse, they're individual, and every child's individual. But the problem, certainly in the United Kingdom and in Ireland, where I'm from, obviously, is that we're not prepared to take a punt on trying something different. Whereas you look at Finland, that is no worse off educationally, in fact, better. But the children are allowed to be children and allowed to have an experience that's really positive. And what happens there is that, I hated school. And because I'm 99% sure I'm neurodiverse. But I think I've done pretty well. So education is just a small part, but I hated it. But through time, I've learned to love to learn. So I love reading stuff. I love, listening to, not necessarily podcasts, but audible books and stuff like that. Because I'm 3 hours a day in the car, so I try to go through a couple of books a week or whatever. But I've learned to love to learn. And that's what's happening in Finland. They are learning to love to learn, because they're all accepted for being individuals and learning in a different way. And over here, I think you develop a hatred of learning if you're not neurotypical, because it's forced upon you. And if you don't do it in the way that they dictate, you're wrong. So you're taught that you're wrong in the way that you want to live your life. And therefore you have to fit a box, and you're boxed in very quickly.
I mean, that's right. I mean, you've really piqued my interest with that what seems to me to be a very astute observation, that we're not prepared to take risks in order to find the solution. And do you think the way I think this through is at this moment, the education system is largely dictated by the government, and certainly funded largely through the government. The government exists in the short term only. It exists through 4-year electoral cycles. That's not very long. Therefore, if a certain party of any persuasion gets into power, what they are probably thinking, or what they might be thinking, is we need here punchy, short-term messages which tick the electorate's boxes, which is going to get us in on a second occasion. And 10-year plans, 15-year plans, we're making fundamental seismic change to something like the education system that is going to untick as many boxes as it ticks. It's not worth taking the risk. It's too potentially threatening from the perspective of being re-elected. Let's just not go there. Do you think the system counts against that, almost entrepreneurial approach to change?
But absolutely, I think, and I think we've all seen examples of teachers work tremendously hard, and there is a huge resourcing challenge. We were talking about this earlier, so we're definitely not about criticising individual teachers. We've seen the best of what they do, but you're absolutely right. It's very hard to change something for the long term, and there isn't that long term vision. This kind of simplest example, I guess, I ever saw of that was when Joseph was about 5 and was being taught to write, and they had this crazy cursive handwriting on the curriculum that he really struggled with because from a processing perspective, he struggled to hold a pencil a little bit. And I was asking the question, why does it matter whether he writes in this flowery style and fits it into a box? Because by the time he hits 16 or 18, he probably won't need to type, let alone write, because everything will be audio recognition. It just won't be a thing anymore. So why are we not teaching our children future ready skills around teamwork, around collaboration, around creativity, emotional intelligence, all the things that are genuine skills they'll need? Because cursive handwriting and being able to join up in a certain way for a child who has either sensory processing issues or, there are certain conditions within the spectrum, as we know, that have dyspraxia. Children with dyspraxia really struggle to hold a pencil sometimes. So why are we focusing and honing in on that rather than actually creating an environment that works? By the same token, I think it's very easy to get it right. And I've seen really spectacular examples of individual teachers. So after Joseph moved schools, he was overwhelmed to go onto stage as part of a class assembly, but there was no issue made over that. And they said, how can we, what would you like to do? And he ended up operating the curtain and doing all the curtain changes. So he felt absolutely integrated into that team. He wasn't excluded by virtue of the fact he wasn't on the stage front and center. So again, I think there's, we do have really strict sort of confines in terms of the curriculum, but equally there are ways and means in which, by the smallest of actions, individuals can hugely help those who maybe don't fit into that box by making them not feel excluded and different when there's actually no reason to, because their strengths are over there, but as part of the same team.